Welcome to AI and Ethics podcast. In today's episode, we explore a topic that touches everyone's life: money, trust, and the growing role of artificial intelligence in financial decision making. My guest is Linda Du, co-founder and CEO of Moola Money, investor at Octa Investment, and contributor to responsible AI and financial inclusion work through the Digital Economist. Linda brings a unique perspective from engineering, consulting, investing, microfinance, and AI-driven personal finance. Together, we will discuss how AI is reshaping the way people manage money, invest, and access financial opportunities, especially for the new generation. But when the algorithm begin to influence financial choices, ethical questions become very important. How do we build AI tools that are personalized but responsible? How do we avoid bias? How do we protect trust? And how can AI make finance more inclusive instead of creating new inequalities? Linda, welcome to AI and Ethics podcast. It is a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Linda, you have worked across engineering, consulting, investing, microfinance, and now AI-driven personal finance. What connects all these chapters of your career?
I think so. I'd like to tell the story of the start of my entry into financial services at Kiva, which is a peer-to-peer distributed micro-lending platform. And there I supported work with the microfinance partners in Southern Africa. And so why I mentioned that is because we were working with really micro entrepreneurs, people selling fritters on the side of the street, people selling phone recharge cards. And so I actually saw finance as a tool for inclusion. Later, when I was at McKinsey, I learned a lot of tools on how to do enterprise grade financial modeling for our clients. And then when I started my investment company, people started asking me support with their own personal financial planning. And so what I saw was that this was a really common problem. So it was also people who were very highly educated and with great careers who really struggled to manage their own money or struggled with their relationship with money. And so what I did was I took the tools that I'd learned at McKinsey, so that enterprise grade financial modeling, and applied it to personal and household finances.
Very interesting and amazing experience. You studied at Cambridge and Yale, worked at McKinsey, supported inclusive finance through Kiva, and now lead Moola Money. How did each of those experiences shape the way you think about ethical technology?
Yeah, so to be honest, I think the contrast between Cambridge and Yale was quite interesting because Cambridge is a very, I think it's the second oldest university in the world. And then Yale, while the university is old, it's very much more tech focused. And I think that's also a representation of US culture. US culture has been driven in the past couple of decades by, and its economy has been driven by advancements in technology, which also really are indicative of the industrial output. So, for example, now I split my time between London and Berlin, and Germany is really stuck in this like industry 2.0 way of thinking of predictive outcomes, kind of this deterministic world in which you know the outcomes, outputs that you need to produce, and then you create a lot of detailed systems, processes, SOPs. In contrast, innovation-based economies are much more probabilistic, so much less deterministic. So there are fewer rule books, there are some guiding practices, but really you're navigating in an unknown world. And so what I'd argue is that the world was already shifting much more towards this probabilistic model in which things could not be easily predicted. And we are, given the massive advances in AI in the past couple of years, less than 5 years, we're much more shifting towards that. And so I think that's also something that I learned in my work around the world. So even at McKinsey, my clients were in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And what I saw was, yeah, Europe tends to have this really predictive way of thinking about the world, and there are rules and guidebooks, etc. Whereas the developing world, it's always been much more based on sales and hustling. And I think some of the best salespeople I've seen have been in the streets of Nigeria. And so, in that world where nothing is determined, where you really have to kind of work for each sales that you bring in. I think that AI is quite great at supporting that transition of structuring a world which is inherently unstructured and not deterministic.
I admire your experience. So, your experience on Cambridge and Yale, and you have had the opportunity to support undeveloped countries. So, thank you for your, let's say, way you how share your knowledge and experience, Linda. Is really a very good motivation for the new generation. Was there a specific moment when you realized that AI could change how people make financial decisions? So how you did, where was the first moment you begin to think this way?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it was 2023 when I really started using ChatGPT, and because I'd been a manager at McKinsey, I actually saw that ChatGPT was faster and better than many analysts and associates. And um, that's not to speak poorly of the associates. I think it just goes to show how powerful this technology is and how it can also free up people, very bright people, to go to higher order work. So no longer do people have to stay up until 2 a.m. Doing some Excel formulas or making PowerPoint slides, aligning boxes on a PowerPoint slide. Now this frees up our mind for critical thinking, specifically when it comes to financial decision making. So when I started the idea for Moola, I actually started working on the idea in end of 2024. And as I was progressing, so even early on, I was getting strong indications of the trust that people had in AI. So, for example, 80% of the early users that I surveyed preferred to speak to an AI chatbot over a human financial advisor because they felt less judged. So they felt they could speak more freely to an AI chatbot, and they felt that they would not be judged. So one person actually said ChatGPT is not going to go home to its spouse and tell them about this 30-year-old that doesn't have their finances in order. So I think that's where I really started to see society shifting towards trusting and being able to share more with the financial AIs, and also trusting the advice and guidance that they were given.
What problem is Moola Money trying to solve for millennials?
So basically, because personal finance has not been on the national curriculum until November last year in the UK, a lot of people who are very highly educated or not have no idea how to manage their money, and they lack the confidence. They don't have the rule book or the guidebook, so they don't know how to max out the different tax benefits they have. Similarly, expats, so a lot of people that we work with are internationals. They might know well the pension system or investment system in their home country, but then they don't have the first clue when it comes to the UK. So they might know in America what a Roth IRA is, but they would not know in the UK what an SIPP is. And so what we wanted to do is some people who are higher earners do have access to relationship managers at private banks. Most people don't, or most people even see these advisors as being inaccessible or biased because they're often attached to banks and commissioned to sell certain products. And so what we wanted to do was create independent guidance that would customize its guidance to the user's financial situation, to their goals, but also bring in this higher level vision, so goal setting. So we do a lot of planning around goals. We'll show what achieving a goal looks like and relate it back to someone's financial trajectory. And so being able to democratize that financial advice. So when we first launched our public beta in March this year, the type of feedback that we were getting really aligned with the original mission statement that we started with. So people were saying things like, "Oh, finally, I can see all my finances in one place. This has helped me make some decisions." And so we were really proud of that. And so what we're doing now is improving the product and scaling the impact of it.
Yeah, very interesting. Me, myself, have been subscribed in your program and system, so I like very much and it's very helpful. So I recommend to all those that need to better budget their financial revenue. So thank you for what you are doing for us and for the community.
No problem. Thank you for using us.
When AI gives financial guidance, how do you balance personalization with responsibility?
So I think the personalization aspect, I would take them as separate from each other because I think the personalization aspect improves the quality of guidance. So I think personalization is a good thing. The main thing that we have to be careful of is customer data protection. So, for example, we hash all our personal identifying information within the database. And when the user actually calls the large language model and speaks to an agent, their identity is actually anonymized so that we use different large language models. We use OpenAI, we use Claude. But then, even though they might get the user's numbers, any personal identifying information like the user's name and email would be stripped. So they wouldn't actually be able to link the information to a profile. So that's one thing that we do. But then I guess the other question of responsibility and accountability is that we believe that the agency should always remain with the user. And that's also why we call what we do guidance rather than advisory. So we'll never tell the user to buy a specific product or to go to a specific bank. What we do is we show the impact of things. So we're very objective and we say, okay, if you're, one example would be you have £20,000 or dollars sitting in a 0% interest account. If you moved it to a 3.5% high yield savings account, here's how much you would get in additional interest in 5, 10, 20 years. So we're never directly telling the person you should get a 3% high yield savings account. We're just showing the impact, and then the user would decide for themselves, hey, I should look into that high yield savings account.
What does trust mean in an AI powered financial product?
I think there's different elements of it. So I think the main thing is that the agency as well as the independence, right? So firstly, the user is always the one in the driver's being chair. They're the ones actually executing on things. And then so that covers the agency part. But then, yeah, there's the data guardrail. So we don't collect more information than we actually need to do the modeling. We make sure everything's securely stored. And even things like, so for example, we're currently building the open banking and transaction level pool. So even then, we're not storing the transaction level data. We're taking the aggregates of them and storing the aggregates. So again, we don't need to actually be on the data input process. We don't actually collect transaction level data because we don't need it. And then there's the independence, which I mentioned. So because we're not tied to a specific bank, the uh, advice that we give, people know that we aren't being paid based on the products that we show to them. So they can trust that the guidance that they're getting is independent and we're not getting any commissions from it.
I'm very interested in your opinion related. What do you think are the biggest bias risk in AI-driven personal finance? So we have credit history bias, for example, income bias, geographic bias, or that availability bias. So what do you think?
I think credit risk bias is a big one, and but then I also think that the financial system itself is quite biased, and by that, the clearest example I can think of is the sophisticated investor criteria. And so it's called different things in different places. I've also heard it being called the sophisticated investor, qualified investor. But what it usually refers to is based on the country that you're looking into, is it's usually a level of income or a level of net wealth above which someone can self-certify as a sophisticated investor. So I believe in the US it's either $200,000 dollars a year in income or 1 million in net worth. But then once you self-certify as a sophisticated investor, you have a lot more products that are available to you. So one example would be a Lombard loan, which is where you can collateralize your portfolio to invest more at extremely low interest rates. You also get likely access to private banking, access to a wealth of products, including potentially private equity products. And then you might be able to access mutual funds with much lower management fees. So I do think that the financial system is inherently quite paternalistic and biased. I mean, the reasoning that regulators will give for that is that it protects people with a lower level of wealth or a lower level of knowledge from making risky investment choices. But in reality, what it does is it actually creates a segregated financial system. Now, credit risk modeling, so very famously, large language models are not able to be used in many credit risk models because, especially when they are black boxes, because they are not explainable, especially when it comes to predictive analytics. So large language models are things where the methodology to make a yes or no decision on providing credit product. So that's actually not allowed because of that black box, and because it has the potential to discriminate against certain users. So I do think that that is correct, and that's also something that we came around in Moola because we actually have our core financial algorithm is deterministic, it's rules based, it's very explainable. And that's because we found that large language models are very good at a lot of things, but they're less good at math and they're less good at providing repeatable results. And we wanted to be sure that the numbers that you were getting out of our model were accurate. So we made a very specific design choice to keep the core deterministic and then use large language models only on the orchestration layer.
Do you think AI should be allowed to give financial advice directly, or should it only support human decision making?
This is a tricky one because I think that people want AI to I think you'd actually be surprised, and this is something that we've learned from our customers as well, is that usually at the end of the journey, so we go as far as to kind of show people what the impact of different decisions are. But like most people will ask at the end of the journey, okay, so what do I do about this? What I want you to tell me what to invest in. And this is something that I call the illusion of agency because I think people like to feel like they're being in control without the actual accountability of decision making. And so I think that's also why people want to be told what to invest in because they want to avoid the accountability of making investment decisions which ultimately don't work out for the better. So I think that yeah, I think that the where the accountability goes, I think that people would actually like to for AI to do the decision making on their behalf, but then they also want to be able to blame the AIs or the AI service providers for any decisions that do go wrong. So I think there's a paradox there in the agency accountability matrix.
Thank you. When you elevate AI startups, do ethical considerations affect investment decisions?
So I not specifically. So we do have a couple of investors who are more ethically minded, and so they might be more interested in exploring things like ESGs. I think the main ethical dilemma that we're solving for is the accessibility of high quality financial guidance. So we've seen on TikTok and on Instagram Reels, there's a lot of quite scammy people, especially in the crypto world, actually, who run pump and dump schemes or who run multi-level marketing schemes. And so there's a wealth of bad advice out there. And so I gave the example of intentional bad advice, but then there's also unintentionally bad advice, which is just wrong or like too vague. And so an example of unintentional bad advice I always give is like advice from my parents because boomers often grew up in a different age. And in the UK, at least, at the moment, it doesn't make financial sense to buy a house because mortgages are more expensive than capital appreciation. But still, people our parents' generation have always been pushing our generation to go and buy houses, even when it doesn't make sense anymore. So there's just so much bad advice out there that we really want to create something that could provide this objective level advice. And so that accessibility of high quality guidance is the ethical issue that we're solving for.
You invest in AI, crypto, technology, and sustainable assets. These are areas with huge potential, but also huge hype. How do you think about risk when you decide to invest?
I think. Well, when it comes to these ones, so I was actually pretty late to get in on AI and crypto both, right? So I think I really taught myself to invest with crypto because crypto it goes through massive periods of volatility, and so it goes up when it goes up, but when it goes down, it really goes down. And so one of the early mistakes that I made is when I got into crypto, kind of as it was going up, I didn't pull out enough when it went down, and so I learned from that. And then the second cycle, I was able to time better. And so I think that yeah, I would say that one thing that crypto showed the world, and this is something that Gen Zs see a lot of, is that the old equation of hard work equals success is broken because there are many crypto millionaires that are quite young and they just took big risks, right? So the new equation for economic success is risk equals reward, and this is now, well known in economics. But basically, because you have to be willing to take big risks to get high rewards. I think for me, I was also quite late to get in on AI. I bought OpenAI shares in 2024, which is earlier than most people because it's still on the private market and not publicly listed yet. But it was because I had personally had that transformative experience with it and had seen how much it had changed my own workflow and enabled me to be somewhere between 10 to 100 times more productive.
What role should investors play in shaping ethical AI? Are investors responsible only for returns or also for the social impact of the technologies they found? What do you think?
I think that as investors, you basically, because you're funding, so someone actually described this the other day to me as investing should be an expression of your personality. And basically, something that I think about a lot as well is how investing is different from gambling. And I think the main difference for me is that you actually have a stake in it and you push the world into a direction you believe in. I think that the CEO of a company is still the most important because even as an investor, you cannot shape every single role or decision that a CEO makes. And so you have to kind of trust the CEO to do things their way. And so it's almost like in portfolio management, you have this thing called discretionary mandate where you say, okay, I'm going to invest my cash in something, but then I'm not going to try and vote at every single board meeting, but I'm just going to trust the portfolio manager to make the best decisions based on the mandate. And the mandate is kind of this set of guiding principles. So I think there is some responsibility, but at the end of the day, you are ultimately placing a bet on the CEO, the team, and also where you think the industry is going to go.
Thank you. Earlier in your career, you worked with Kiva across Southern Africa on mobile banking and microcredit. What did that experience teach you about access to finance?
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned this already, which is so what I found really interesting was that microfinance gets quite a bad reputation in the Western world, especially in Europe. But when you go to these places, like banks don't actually give loans to micro entrepreneurs. So it's actually and also another thing is that many of the micro entrepreneurs are women because the men can go out and get jobs. So it's basically the only source of financing for these very, very small scale businesses. So I think that kind of actually gave me the perspective of finance is a basic human right, it's a utility, and it's something to help people achieve their goals.
Can AI make finance more inclusive? What do you think? Or will it mostly benefit people who are already digitally and financially literate? So, it's your opinion about this based on your experience and all, let's say, your network.
I think it's both. I think a proxy to that is therapy, where uh, one of the biggest use cases of large language models is therapy. And while people might argue whether that's good or bad, I know many people personally for whom that's their first exposure to therapy at all, and they wouldn't feel comfortable going to a human. And so I would argue that whether it's delivered by AI or a human, if someone's actually using the tool as a mechanism for self-exploration, that is a positive thing. Similar thing to personal finance. So I think a lot of people will just ask a large language model about their personal finances. Some of the feedback that we've gotten out from for our tool is that it's Um, it's for people who already have an Excel sheet. So people who've already tried to do some level of financial modeling, have some comfort with financial modeling, but want to take it to the next level where they can do the scenario planning. And so I think our product is an example of the last category that you mentioned, where it's helping financially sophisticated people become even more sophisticated and enabling them to make life-changing decisions like leaving their work or starting new businesses.
Thank you. Financial services are already regulated, and AI regulation is evolving quickly recently. What kind of rules do you think AI powered finance needs, actually?
Yeah. So no, this is quite an interesting one because in the UK we have something that's called the guidance and advisory boundary. And so basically you can go pretty far without it being considered advisory. So pretty much to the point of recommending a specific financial institution or a specific equity or ETF, you can basically package that as financial guidance. We had to do a review with our lawyers about our AI guardrails because, I mean, even if you ask ChatGPT or Claude about specific asset classes, they can tell you that information and they are not regulated as financial advisors. And so we basically had to give guardrails to the AI. So this is something called a meta prompt where you give the AI a set of rules. And so we basically have that set of rules being reviewed by the lawyers. So that is how we manage it. We basically say we do our best, we give the AI guardrails, but there is the off chance that it might recommend to you or tell you something like you should go open an account in NatWest. But actually, we are more limited. Someone actually asked me to put into the AI agent whether they should buy SpaceX shares on the day of the IPO, and I tried it, and our agent was quite well behaved and said, "Hey, I can't offer specific investment advice, but here's the steps that you should go through if you're considering making an investment in general." So yeah, so that is how it works.
Thank you. We need your advices because I like very much what you do and your experience. So are very helpful for me, but either for the public and all the followers that are following us. So, as a woman founder and investor in AI, Linda, have you experienced the industry differently?
I don't think so because I mean I know a lot of people will talk about this, but to be honest, like there's been many situations where I've been the only woman in the room, and what I do sometimes get sad about is self-limiting beliefs. So I actually was at a Women and Wealth workshop today hosted by HSBC, and they were giving the statistics from a survey that they did where women felt less confident to manage their finances. They felt like often investments were not for them, even though women actually manage most household finances globally. So I do think that there is a confidence issue. I do think that there's a lot of self-limiting beliefs preventing people from getting involved. And so what we hope is that, with products like ours, with other financial education products, education and guidance products, that will give everyone the equal right to participate in the economy.
So, what specific advice would you give to women building in AI or fintech?
I think just go out there and do it. There's also the classic saying that says like go out and do things before you feel ready. So just go out, test it, go all in as early as you can, and yeah, take the risks.
In 5 years, how do you think AI will change the way ordinary people will manage money?
So I mean, I think that there will be, I think we'll eliminate all of the boring work. So, for example, at the moment, I've been thinking about closing one of my bank accounts in Germany because I have a second one that I use much more, but I still have some direct debits or standing orders coming from the account that I'm trying to close, and I just can't be bothered to close it because it's a lot more work for me to move those payments to another bank account. So I think stuff like that, which is very low value add and takes up a lot of time but isn't that meaningful, I think a lot of that stuff will be automated. I think AI financial guidance will be completely universal. I know that many neobanks are already trying to build this. I think that they will struggle to integrate it they'll struggle to get the hybrid between deterministic and probabilistic quite right, because that's what we spent the most time overcoming. But I do think that everyone will just have financial guidance at their fingertips. And I do think there will be a lot more automation when it comes to investment decision making. So yeah, already robo advisory before AI was really taking off and doing really personalized advice. But I think as well in the execution stage, because a lot of people just like get really stuck because they're like, okay, now that I know what to invest in, how do I actually open that account? How do I actually do that? There's a lot of friction in the onboarding, and so I think a lot of that execution friction will be reduced.
Thank you. If you could design one ethical principle that every AI finance company had to follow, what would it be?
I don't necessarily know if there's a single ethical framework, but I think avoiding the trope of the thing that I mentioned before of the illusion of agency, so letting people click through while actually making the decisions. I think people should be accountable for the decisions that they're making. I think they should understand them. So I think even if someone's like, I want to be told what to do, making sure that they understand the full consequence of the decision that they are about to make.
Very true. Thanks. What advice would you give to founders building AI products in sensitive areas like finance, health, or education?
I do actually think that because the standards of regulation have been so high in those areas, that founders are generally pretty good at thinking this through. And I think that, people building these areas are often aware of these, especially if they have domain expertise and domain experience in these highly regulated industries. So I think the nice thing is that on the production side, the AI tools have made it so easy to get started very quickly on very limited resources, that it makes it much easier to build quickly. So I think the same rules of the lean startups to apply, where you should just be testing the value proposition with users and figure out what it is that the users are actually coming back for. So getting to that as fast as possible with these brand new tools we have would be my best advice.
Thank you. And now, the most important question. Where can listeners follow your work and learn more about Moola Money?
Sure. So we have all our social channels active. I think the best thing I can do is to get you to try the app. So app dash Moola, that's moola.com is our application. And then if you type in Moola Money on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, everywhere else, you'll be able to find us.
Thank you very much, Linda. This was our last question for this podcast, and your conversation was very inspiring. So, today we explored how AI is changing personal finance, investing, and financial inclusion, but also why ethics, transparency, fairness, and trust must be at the center of every financial technology we build. One key message from this conversation is clear. AI can help people make better financial decisions, but only if it is designed with responsibility and human impact in mind. To our listeners, thank you for joining this episode of AI and Ethics. If this conversation made you think differently about AI, money, and trust, please follow the podcast, share it with your network, and continue being part of this important dialogue. Because the future of finance should not only be digital, it should be ethical, inclusive, and build on trust. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next conversation. Thank you, Linda, very much.
Thank you for having me.